Hi there, I'm Kevin Benedict, reporting live from Brussels at the Enterprise Mobility Exchange. I have with me Divya Mahajan from Philips International. Thanks for joining me, Divya.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me on the show.
So yeah, let me just ask you a few questions here. You shared yesterday in a session that the company Philips had you focused on internal kinds of enterprise mobility projects. But in the middle of some of those projects, they said, you know what, our priorities have changed to customer-facing applications. So why don't you share with the listeners here, first, what were you doing on the enterprise mobility side, and why did they change those priorities, and how's it different working on the customer-facing application side?
I think, let me just set the record straight. I don't think the priorities have changed. It's just the priorities have expanded. So if you looked at Philips about 2 years or 3 years back when the internal productivity for field engineers was launched, it was pretty much the only game in town. You were looking at engineers and making it much more easier for them to get work orders done more efficiently, less paper, lesser hassles of getting to the backend systems, etc. When you start looking at the picture, 2 years later, you had devices like the iPhone and the Androids really hitting the market a lot. You had tablets really hitting the market last year. So all of a sudden people started understanding that this mobile stuff is not just for field engineers, it's for someone else too. And that's what we call the consumer revolution. The push for very smart devices which are highly connected in the hands of consumer meant a lot of opportunities started opening up. So we suddenly moved from a very expensive ruggedized device which is used by field engineers to a very commoditized environment which a lot of consumers can access. As you can imagine, it's a big shift in thinking.
Right.
Let me just illustrate a quick one. I think when you're talking about field engineers, you really organize around an engineer's viewpoint. Okay, but the platform that you're using, Windows CE 6.5 or Windows Mobile 6.5, is a platform which is more tailored for, well, I'd call it previous generation ways of working, in the sense that you could get away with a user interface which is not intuitive, not slick, okay, because people expected that. They didn't really have very high expectations of the platform. When you come to a consumer, it's totally different. The key message is when a consumer picks up something from you, it's your brand talking to him. If that looks bad, it translates to your brand looking bad. So the customer experience, the user interaction, the design, becomes far more paramount and important than in internal productivity. So that's just the outside part. How do you experience it? Okay, I would actually say that we should take the learnings from the consumer side and also apply them in field productivity. I mean, if you have an engineer who has a really slick interface, it doesn't have to be flashy, slick, as in really works for him. That makes him more productive. And that's one of the learnings we're taking from the consumer side back into the enterprise. The challenge when I shifted was really understanding some of the paradigms you have in mobility, in enterprise, don't work with consumers. Let's take your middleware platforms. Most of the vendors which we are working with, we work with Cybis, okay, were targeted as MEAPs for enterprise application platforms. The pricing structure, the economics around integrating not with about maybe 10,000 users, but with 1 million users or maybe 100,000 users is something which is not properly spec'd out, or in some cases not even available out there. The control you have over the devices is very different. You can have Android, you can have various variants of Android, you could have the iPhone, you could have the iPad, you could have Windows. Suddenly the choices explode. In the enterprise field, you chose the device, maybe you chose 2, maybe 3, but that was it. Easier to maintain. Now suddenly you have to maintain these flurry of devices with a totally different user experience, and the backends which you relied upon, okay, have to be changed or replaced because they just don't scale up to what you need in terms maybe in economics or maybe in performance. So those are challenges that we had to solve, and we took at it by taking a step back and looking at architecture. So that's how Philips is trying to at least, and succeed in the mobile space, and also trying to make mobile a part of our strategy in business, rather than just being something off that we're doing in the silo.
So let me ask you this follow-up question, Divya. What platform do you use for the customer-facing apps then? So if you're using Sybase for the internal enterprise mobility projects, do you need something different then for the customer-facing apps?
It's not a question of different. It's also a question of what really scales up in some cases. Okay, what is the level of involvement you need with this consumer clients? If your app is a very simple app which is accessing a web service towards your backend, you probably don't need something which has a very high overhead on synchronization and performance. Sybase is very good at what it does, okay, but you don't need that in some consumer apps. So you need an alternative solution which makes it easier. Okay, what the middleware should succeed in doing is hiding the complexity of your internal systems from the application that you write and run on the device. Keep that very thin and very close to what the consumer or the user is trying to do, and push the complexity behind, either into your backend systems if you're lucky enough and they're flexible enough, or into middleware if you don't have that flexibility in the backend systems. We're looking at a couple of partners in this space. We're looking at, for example, RoMobile. We're looking at NetMobile. We're looking at Kony Solutions, okay, and 2 or 3 other vendors. But these are in a lot of pilot phases where we're trying to see what fits where. In some cases, we're also looking at internal technologies like you can build on top of .NET, etc.
Great. Well, I want to thank you very much for sharing both your experience, knowledge, and where you're going.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you.